The following podcast contains opinions from paid professionals. The information provided in this podcast is general in nature and not advice. For free and confidential support, call 1-800-858-858 or visit gamblinghelponline.org.au.
So we think returning for another great day's racing Saturday, Rosehill Gardens, Stakes Day, the Tancred and the Vinery. Benway, we had some success on the tip last week, so hopefully we can continue it this week.
I must say, things didn't quite go to plan, bar Lady of Camelot with a little saver in the slipper, but the slipper was a race that, I was just so excited to see, and it had every bit of the surprise and controversy and utter bewilderment from some at the end. It was brilliant, and the best ride won. Blake Shin, I say time and time again, and so do so many other people, we miss him in Sydney.
Yeah.
He throws a complete spanner in the works, he does things differently, and while he had to be patient, it was an absolute gem.
She was explosive. Coming up to Sydney to ride her in that trial at Hawkesbury a couple of weeks ago really paid dividends to learn that she could take a sit and then explode. Yeah. He had 3 winners on the day, and I spoke to him after the slipper, and he said that slippers are so important and so special for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's the greatest, best and most valuable 2-year-old race in the world. But it's one of the big four, one of the Grand Slam in Australian racing. It does throw up the question, though, do we need to review what the big four is? So at the moment, it's the Golden Slipper for the 2-year-olds, the Caulfield Cup over the 2400, the Cox Plate, has to include the Cox Plate, and then the great 2-mile race at Flemington being the Melbourne Cup.
And the Everest.
Well, the Everest is one we throw in for the big 5, but if we're going to work with a big 4 and a Mount Rushmore situation with only 4 races, the big ones that you want to win, do we need to relook at that and maybe take one out and put the Everest in? Because I know nowadays every trainer, jockey and owner, they would bloody love to win an Everest.
Yeah, speaking from a pure pundit point of view, I would almost leave the slipper out. Not me, pure pundit point of view. Okay. I guess I am a pure pundit. But because the big 3 for me were always Caulfield Cup, Cox Plate, Melbourne Cup. So maybe it's just my age showing, but it would still be those plus the Everest. So then if you're going to say, right, the slipper's in, given what it, the involvement with the breeding industry and how lucrative it is, and if you're going to have it in, it's probably the Caulfield Cup that misses out.
I agree. If we're going to work with a big 4, and this is a conversation that we continue to keep having in Australian racing, we've got too many Group 1s as it is. Yeah. We can't have a big 5 and then in a couple of years' time we'll make it the big 10 or something like that. If we're working with a big 4, for me, it's the slipper for the 2-year-old factor. It's the Everest for the pure theatre, the exorbitant amount of prize money up for grabs, the wheeling and dealing of the slots and everything that it encompasses about Sydney racing. So you've got 2 Sydney races. The Cox Plate, weight for age, Moonee Valley, tight turning circuit, produced many a champion, and I don't use that word lightly, champions win the Cox Plate. And then the testing material that is the Melbourne Cup. I think having 2 handicapped stayers races in Victoria in there nowadays, it doesn't sit as well with me. I think the big 4 in modern times are the Golden Slipper, the Everest, the Cox Plate and the Melbourne Cup.
But then in terms of prize money, we're overlooking things like Queen Elizabeth's. Now, I'm not suggesting a Golden Eagle is up there, but I am saying the prize money is out of whack with what we're now saying, and so is group status, because one of your big 4 isn't a Group 1.
But it should be.
Maybe.
And I think in time, and I hope very shortly it is, because there's a few days that I look forward to every single year up in Sydney. Golden Slipper is one of them, and the Everest is another one. Days at the championships, those 4 days, they're the days that I live and breathe for.
and now you speak about Victoria and Sydney and New South Wales. It's not always honky-dory, and sometimes the calendars can get a little bit convoluted. So this weekend's come along and you've got a little upset.
Well, I'm a little upset because we've got the Australian Cup and also the Tancred on the same day. It didn't happen last year. And it means that the same sort of horse is split. We've got half them in Victoria racing at Flemington. We've got half of them up in Sydney racing at Rosehill Gardens. If the programming and the pattern was actually refigured out and readjusted, then maybe we wouldn't have this issue. Down in Melbourne, we've got some big guns going around. Mr. Brightside and Pride of Jenny continue their epic head-to-head battle. A Tissue, she's brilliant at Flemington as well. Cascadian, he rarely runs a poor race and was steaming home in the All-Star Mile a couple of weeks ago. Can he go back-to-back in the Australian Cup? And then up in Sydney, the Tancred, I think it's fair to say it's a moderate edition of the Tancred Stakes. There's a few big guns missing there. It's headlined by Post Impressionist, and at time of record, he will still be heading that way on Saturday. I mean, I think it's a sit and steer job for him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's not the depth to it, probably. I'm going to agree and disagree. So I'm going to agree on the front that we've got races in the wrong spots on the wrong dates. So just for a bit of clarification, and I've got my main Wayno onto the job here. So back in 2019, there was a 1 week gap between the Australian Cup and the All-Star Mile. And it became apparent over the next few years that we had a problem there. You had a distance drop, and you either had horses going to the Australian Cup and bypassing the All-Star Mile, which was meant to be the new jewel in the crown, or the Australian Cup started to fall away as horses were going towards the All-Star Mile.
Yep.
So then we continued the 1 week gap, and we got up until last year when we flipped things around and we've gone All-Star Mile first into Australian Cup. And that probably does sort of work. It was a 1 week gap at first, and now it's a 2 week gap because you're going 1,600, 2,000. But also Sydney's gone back a week. They've gone forward a week as well. Victoria is trying to avoid the AFL season, which keeps getting earlier and earlier. New South Wales is trying to get ahead of the league season as well. So we've sort of got this moving problem. Where I don't agree is I don't think it's impacted the Tancred at all.
Oh, you love the field this year?
No, I don't like the field at all, but I don't think it's impacted it. Bear with me. Mr. Brightside, not a mile and a half. Pride of Jenny, not a mile and a half. A Tissue, not a mile and a half. Legato, not a mile and a half. Cascadian, not a mile and a half.
It's a fair point.
They've all won Group 1s. So I think it's stolen from the Ranvet.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So the Ranvet
last
weekend, we've got a small field, and I reckon nearly all of them would have gone there. So in a perfect world, you would say, hey, Victoria, can you maybe go earlier if everyone agrees, which they won't. Can you go earlier and have the All-Star Mile as this linchpin, start to the campaign for these horses that are going to culminate maybe even in the Sydney Cup over 32. So you're going to say, right, All-Star Mile feeds into Australian Cup, which is a bit weird because it's a $4 million race being a precursor to a $3 million race.
This is what it all comes down to, though. All the programming in Victoria, it feels like over the last couple of years has centred around the All-Star Mile and making sure that it is front of mind and gets the best possible field. And we've discussed this on this very podcast, that hasn't worked this year. And I think now we've got to put the Group 1s, especially in Victoria at this time of year, that's got to be your bread and butter. That's got to be the thing you work towards, right?
Yeah, most likely. And then if there was to be a tinker at the Sydney end, as I said, I think we're a week out of whack this year for various reasons. But I think if there was to be a change, I'd much rather see maybe a Ranvet shift to be on Coolmore Day. Mm-hmm. But that means that we don't have the 5 Group 1s on the same day, which I think Sydney kind of likes that mantle of the 5 Group 1s on a day. And I think the Queen Elizabeth Sydney Cup, I'd rather see the Sydney Cup on the last day of the carnival.
Yep.
So that horses have sort of
So on all age day.
Yeah.
Yep.
But there are smarter people than me and smarter people than us, Em, that are in charge of that stuff, and I'm sure they'll find a resolution.
Well, let's quickly preview both of these big staying contests on Saturday, starting with the Tancred. As I said, Post-Impressionist in the Manion Cup last weekend, he was just brilliant. And the interesting thing, hearing from Tom Marquand this week, back over in the UK, he's a horse they had a good opinion of. He hasn't been a Group 1 star over there, but he's obviously settled into the Australian way of life and that one-on-one attention that he's getting over here very well. He's obviously loving being the apple of the William Haggis's team eye, and he is blossoming. And if they do back him up on Saturday, I think he's going to be very hard to beat because he's got that turn of foot and he's that European stayer they all seem to be heads and shoulders above the rest of what we can produce.
Now, what do you think of the Mr. Brightside versus Jenny
Battle. If she continues to do what she does out front and Declan Bates continues to rate her to absolute perfection, you look at those sectionals from a few weeks back, and I know that can be boring to talk about, but it was as even and as steady and as equal as you like all throughout that 1,600 metres at Caulfield. If he does it again over the 2,000, I think they're both pet distances, aren't the 2,000. Having said that, it took an absolute freak of a horse and a Hong Kong champion and romantic warrior to beat Mr. Brightside in a Cox Plate. But I reckon their true best pet distances are both the miles, so they're both going to be tested.
I think Mr. Brightside turns the tables now.
Okay. Settles a little closer?
Settles a little closer, although that really is up to Jenny.
How far she was to take off.
He's settling as close as he can. It's just a matter of, how far in front she is. But either way, it's going to be a brilliant battle.
A tissue is the one that relishes that 2,000 metres.
True.
So I wouldn't be dismissing her chances at all. And as we mentioned earlier, Cascadian too. He's just an old warhorse battling on, 9 years old, that baldy face. God love him.
Tries his heart out every time.
Doesn't he just?
Yeah.
What about the match race that we got this weekend in Sydney? We spoke about the Slipper last weekend as a match race. It didn't eventuate. I have a feeling the Vinery is really the match race of this autumn carnival.
Well, you've got two camps who absolutely know what they're doing, that both believe they've got champions in their stables. So, and I don't say that term loosely either. They really do think they've got a champion in orchestral in New Zealand. And, we steal a lot of things from New Zealand. We stole Russell Crowe, Crowded House.
The Pavlova,
yeah. It's all, we've taken all of the Far Lap. We've taken nearly everything that's good out of there and said that's ours. So this is their horse. Now, Zardozi we're claiming as our own. Kingman, Dubawi, but Australian.
She's still ours.
Very Australian. So with all that in mind, there's kind of a national approach to it as well, Australia versus New Zealand, which will be great. You've got one horse that's, looking to do a Derby Oaks double, another one that's already claimed the Oaks in the spring and is now obviously looking on either a Derby or an Oaks path, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But I just think there's so much to love about both of them. Staying fillies or mares are never going to have unbeaten records, really, are they? I mean,
especially in Australia, because we start our campaigns over the 14 or the 1600 and they might not reach their peak until they get to the 2000 or the 24. It's done differently in Europe and the UK, but they usually have a couple of prep runs to get them fit.
So speaking of the prep, you got 2400 back to 2000. I don't like it. But that said, I'd be the first. I've sort of got orchestral first past the post. But then you factor in price. You got one $1.60 and one $4.20. My thought is back Zardozi now, because I just can't see that gap staying as wide as it is. They can't let Zardozi get out to $5, $6. I mean, she's too good. So then suddenly if that closes up, you might have an opportunity to back orchestral. If by some miracle it got back out to even money, you could be in a position where you win with either. But anyway, you might be in a position where you're all in Zardozi when you actually like the orchestral if it just keeps trimming in. There's so many implications in terms of what happens from here too, and I guess that's the next discussion point. They meet on Saturday.
Yes.
So then does the loser decide to go a different direction? Or do you say, there's an opportunity when we get up in trip we can turn the tables?
Well, I know you've had a conversation with someone this morning to be able to clarify the path of one of these fillies. So orchestral, from what we're hearing, she's won the New Zealand Derby in a trot and canter. Unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
She will obviously go around in the Vinery on Saturday, and then we're hearing the Oaks will be her eventual target for this autumn preparation. What about Zardozi?
So I guess the Zardozi question starts with Tom Kitten, doesn't it? As soon as Tom Kitten was down for Saturday, and they're going to make a call 7:30 on Tom Kitten. As soon as we saw Tom Kitten here, a few sort of the alarms were going off saying, hang on, so you're going 3 weeks in a row with Tom Kitten into the Derby?
Because he ran last weekend, and then he'll run this Saturday, and then next Saturday is the Derby.
They still haven't made a call on this Saturday. The Derby is still absolutely the
number
focal
one
point,
target.
and that's what I called to clarify. Is the Derby still the focal point, or have you decided he's not going well enough and we're going to send Zardozi to the Derby? Right, so that was the purpose of the call. Are you going to run on Saturday instead? Well, it sounds like they may or may not run on Saturday, determining James just needs to determine whether he thinks Tom will be best suited having another run or not having another run. But he's definitely going to the Derby. But where it went a little differently to what I'd expected was when he started talking about Zardozi. So at the moment, the plan A for Godolphin is to have Zardozi and Tom Kitten in the Derby, which makes complete sense because when you look back to the spring, she was so fantastic on the quick backup. They're so keen to do it again. So she runs this Saturday, backs up in the Derby. She's currently $15 for the Derby. Everyone thinks she's skipping it to go to the Oaks. Orchestral's there at $6 as a just in case. Our tab traders are too scared. She might go to the Derby, but I don't think she will.
I don't think she will.
So Zardozi to run this weekend.
Wow.
Run in the Derby. Plan A. If she runs well in the Derby and pulls up well, Oaks as well.
When was the last time, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse, so to speak, that a filly won a Derby and an Oaks within 8 days?
Well, this would make it an Oaks Derby Oaks triple while we're all talking about an Oaks Derby or Derby Oaks double. So that just shows you the standing with which Godolphin have her, and it's got nothing to do with whether they're scared of Orchestral or not. They just think with her style of racing, the quick backup is the plan. So they're happy to go quick backup, quick backup. Now, all of this hinges on the weekend.
Yeah.
If she doesn't pull up well or she runs below par, that could be the end of the prep. You never know. She's already got a Group 1 to her name. They probably would push on to one of them. And if Tom doesn't run well, then you need to reassess for the Derby. But at the moment, plan A for Godolphin, Tom Kitten and Zardozi in the Derby after Saturday, and Zardozi potentially going on to the Oaks.
Can I throw another little pigeon in here, so to speak? Tom Marquand, he has ridden Zardozi all throughout this preparation, winning the far lap on her last start. Absolutely brilliant. He can't ride next Saturday on Derby Day. He is suspended. So suddenly I look and say, okay, that's her eventual goal for the preparation. She'll have 54.5 in a Derby. That's what a filly carries. There is a great ride up for grabs for a jock who can get down to 54.5 on a filly in the Derby. If that's what happens.
Especially when we, the idiots, have just been discussing for months about how James has chosen Orchestral as his Oaks ride. Well, that's only the case if they both end up in the Oaks, and they may well. I think all things being equal, they will. But suddenly if a Derby ride becomes available and that weight kind of rules a couple of people out, you're right. There is potentially a very, very good ride. And if she runs well on Saturday and Orchestral isn't in the Derby, she'll be shortish. She'll be single figures. She won't be 15 anymore.
Great super sleuthing from you. I reckon markets are about to be turned on their heads.
I hope so.
Well done. Let's talk about some of our other little finds for the weekend as well.
What did you find any stars? You know, the stars aligned with any horses?
It's a sign.
Yeah.
My boom horse, and I wanted to put him in here in It's a Sign only purely on the name. And I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous. I know that trainers keep lists on their phones, in notebooks of names of horses that they would like to use at some point in time. My father does it. His list, there is some weird, wacky and wonderful things in there, probably none of which I would personally use.
No one's surprised.
But I reckon the name Linebacker, I reckon John O'Shea and this team of owners, who are a prolific group of owners, they have been holding on to this name for a long, long while and waited for the perfect opportunity to name a colt Linebacker, which is just, it's a bloody great name.
They love it, don't they? There are several names that sort of jump out at you when you have a look at Saturday, named after famous people and those sorts of things. Matthew Flinders is one. Well, you hope it's got its compass right for the weekend. But Tom Cruisen, Tom Cruisen's probably the one for me.
The other one I look and go, you've held on to that name for a long time as well, is Airman.
Yeah.
That's another one where they've got, that's a great name for a horse, and they've held it and held it. So both Airman and Linebacker to run big races. And I think Linebacker wins the value. I loved hearing from John O'Shea during the week. how he's been ducking and weaving all of the other great 2-year-olds in the Golden Slipper to go to the Bayou and then ducking and weaving again, and hopefully, in his words, a few maybe fall by the wayside to go to the Champagne. So that's the plan for him. The other one that I wanted to make note, and I think he can run a big race in the Neville Selwood over the 2000 on Saturday as well as Serpentine. So imagine winning an Epsom Derby, which is the stallion-making race of Europe. If you want to win one of the great classics in Europe, the Epsom Derby is one of those. Yeah. He's a horse by Galileo that was purchased by the Williams team after he did that to be brought out here to Australia. Unfortunately, when they purchased him and not too long after, there was a decision made to geld him. Yeah. So you've probably spent an absolute mozza, I don't know the exact figure, for a horse who most Epsom Derby winners go on to stand at stud. Yeah. And now we've got old gelded Serpentine, who was brilliant first up.
Very good, yeah.
And I think he can win again on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely in that race up to his eyeballs. It's interesting in Australia with horses like him now because it's different over there. But here where we have so few races for those horses, you get Manzois, Lindemann, where it's kind of a no-brainer now to geld them. You kind of look and you think, oh, an attractive enough stallion proposition. But, for example, the Tancred, it's our only weight for age 1.5 mile Group 1 in Australia, I think. And then we've got the handicap of the Caulfield Cup. And then we've got a Melbourne Cup that kind of just stands by itself with a Sydney Cup at 32. There's not enough races for them to be big name size anymore. So, yeah, it is super weird. And it's even weirder being an English derby. But I think it's going to become more and more prevalent in Australia that we see derby winners have to be gelded.
Have to be snipped.
Yeah.
Your best of the weekend, maybe at odds?
Yeah, they opened up $26 about High Dandy, and that was a mistake.
Did you take it?
I wasn't quick enough. You got to be super quick. But I did get considerably more than the $13 we're now seeing about High Dandy. So for those unaware, for those unaware, you should be aware because you should watch Black Bookers 7 p.m. on Thursday nights on STC.
I knew that you plugged the podcast on Black Bookers last weekend, and here you are plugging Black Bookers on the podcast.
Is there a problem with that? Yeah, cross-promotion.
I think it's excellent.
Yeah, so we've been following this horse for a while. The first start where it kind of came on the radar, wide draw, went back, hit the line well. Next start, led throughout, looked so strong through the line, and you just knew that whatever in the team, they had a decent race in mind. I'm not sure this is the grand final yet, but this is kind of where we get to see where High Dandy's at.
So led and won by 4 or 5 last start.
Yeah.
Over the 1600.
It wasn't a race of this calibre. We're not saying that. But at $26, it was worth an each way crack. And at $13, I think it still is. So you'll be on Linebacker. Anything else that jumps out?
I think it's a great day to have a bet. I think Macarena and Hinged in the Emancipation are going to be hard to beat. In the Tulloch, I wanted to have something each way on Fists of Fury.
Yep.
I think he's been forgotten.
Everyone will be on Y-Mark.
Yeah. He needs to win and then pay the late entry fee to the Derby.
Well, there are a few in that boat.
Yeah. And then I'm with Orchestral and Post-Impressionist, so the two favourites in the Group 1s. And I'm also keen to have an each way play on Calipore as well, in the Tancred as well. We know he sees out the trip over the 2,400 metres. It's the third up peaks, I reckon.
Okay. This is sort of we've had one main meal and we've had a bit of a break, and now we're having an entree tomorrow, and we really rip in after that. It's a good time to be alive and be a racing fan in Sydney.
Well done on that little piece of juicy news as well.
Let's hope it proves accurate.
Yeah.
All eyes on Saturday.
I hope she wins and post-race who we can ask. So are we headed towards a derby, and who does ride?
I could not get the app out fast enough while I was chatting to him.
So what was the price again?
$15.
Okay, $15 for Zardozi in the Derby.
Yeah.
Have a great Saturday. Can't wait. All ahead of us, and we'll be back for day 1 of the championships next week on So We Think.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.